People who help fight human trafficking. By what are some tips you have for spotting illegal activity, and reporting it? By Ask Reddit. I worked as front desk for a hotel, had a couple of experiences with this. Look for groups of 2 to 3 where one person does all of the talking, specifically when the others look scared, are overly covered, cringe when the talker is speaking, or look under the influence of something. Ensure you get ID from all parties when you suspect something is going on, note down their room number and names given. Trust your gut. What we call a gut feeling is a combination of millions of tiny factors you might not knowingly be aware of. Tiny details like hitched breathing, micro-expressions, specific lying tells, environmental factors, etc. These all add up and let your subconscious mind make connections that your general mind might not. Trust that feeling if you suspect something is wrong, and contact the police to inform them of a suspected human trafficking issue. Both times my gut told me to call it in, I ended up regrettably being correct.
These specific details are great, thank you.
I'm shook. I saw an odd group of 3 at an airport once, come back from Jamaica. One was small, timid, fragile and looked vastly different than the other 2 who were rugged and were talking to each other constantly. The timid one just tagged along and never looked at them or talked to them. I should have reported them. A border security even stopped my fiancé and I and asked us a bunch of questions, one being, if we saw anyone suspicious. My gut was telling me that trio did not look right, and according to the points you made, the 2 were trafficking the young girl. F.
Hey, please don't beat yourself up. The worst part about all this is that it can be so hard to notice. And when you do notice, it can be so easy to write off, even unintentionally. I'm sure you've learned from the experience and desire to trust your gut a little bit more. Personally, I'm very anxious, and if I always trusted my gut I would be wrong 9 times out of 10 on basically anything lol, but my point is, this isn't cut and dry. Don't kick yourself for not acting when you weren't completely sure. If it were that easy to just say something, then trafficking wouldn't exist at all.
Not really helping fight human trafficking, but if you're watching P and spot something you even think is child P, you can report the website here, https://www.missingkids.org/gethelpno/cybertoplan.
Holy poo, this brought back a bad image. A couple months ago I was looking for this one adult video that I liked but seemed to be removed from P-Hub, which in itself should have been a red flag. I eventually found it after a couple of minutes, but it was on one of those sketchy-ass websites where a pop-up comes up every other click you make. Well, turns out one of those pop-ups goes to a literal child P forum, where the first thing I'm greeted with is a picture of a little girl doing something I won't even say here. I immediately reported the site and closed out faster than I ever have before. Moral of the story: avoid sketchy P sites. This poo is way more out in the open than you'd think.
Yeah, that's how I learned where I can report websites. Spent the rest of the night thinking the FBI was going to knock down my door. It's surprising how that poo is just on the surface web and so easy to stumble on.
Unless you had the files on your computer, or frequented that site, I don't think you'd be on their radar, especially if you reported the site after finding it.
I heard you don't even need to be looking for P to land on one. Could be a sketchy streaming website and accidentally clicking an as.
There are plenty of dodgy websites out there full of bogus links, buttons that can lead you to dodgy websites or downloads. Often it leads to viruses or scams, but it can lead to anything suspect. Common websites that are full of this sort of stuff are file sharing, streaming sites for not so legitimately shared content, websites for downloading pirated movies, music, computer programs, games or game mods, and of course P-ography.
This is a great tip. One of the problems of P is that it's nearly impossible to tell who is being coerced behind the scenes and who isn't. The younger they are, the more likely coercion is. But even adults can be trafficked or coerced or otherwise trapped or taken advantage of. Plus, the rise of easy access P is fueling a rise in sex trafficking. https://fightthenew.org/how-p-fuels-sex-trafficking/.
I attended a talk at a cybersecurity conference about online grooming, revenge P and issues with the P industry. It really opened my eyes on how much easier the internet has made sexual exploitation and grooming.
And then people got angry at P-Hub for imposing stricter rules, but frankly I was surprised there wasn't more of a system out there for making sure videos, pictures are from legit sources that at the very least verify the people's ages.
Agreed, I can't remember how many it was, but some CSA and SAW survivors have had to pretend to be lawyers to get videos of their assault, abuse taken down from P sites. A fake P hub only acted and implemented the changes because MasterCard were no longer going to allow transactions on the site. Not sure how credible that is though.
I remember seeing one where the lass was just so clearly not there. I DK if she was on DG or if she had just clocked out of the situation, but Christ, it was disturbing.
I've told this story on here before. I don't fight human trafficking, but I'm a teacher who had a student who was sold by his mother in exchange for DG. He was kept as a sex slave from ages 3 to 11 when the FBI uncovered a sex ring and found him. He had never been to school. He had never even been out of the house. These sorts of crimes are not being committed out in the open. They are very well hidden. You will never see these children, and no one is missing them. This poor boy couldn't read or write. One day, he got a 100% on his spelling test. He asked me if I could call his mom and ask her to take him back and he'd be a good boy from now on. Child sex trafficking is unfortunately all too common, but it's become a very hidden problem.
This is heartbreaking.
One day, he got a 100% on his spelling test. He asked me if I could call his mom and ask her to take him back and he'd be a good boy from now on. Man, that comment is just so innocent and effed up. God damn.
This is heartbreaking. My therapist once told me the story of a young boy whose mother poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. He was put in a coma for healing, and when he was brought out of the coma, he was screaming for his mommy. This story allowed me to forgive myself, or at least understand why I loved my horribly abusive mother. Honor thy mother and father should also include honor thy child.
As a father myself to a beautiful 4-year-old boy who is my entire world, I couldn't effing imagine. The worst part is that he said he would be good. Dude, I effing can't. Like, how can anyone do this? Children are innocent, full of hope, full of life, and it's effing soul crushing to see things like this. Edit. Thanks for my first gold, stranger. My highest awarded post is me sharing my heartbreak for a little boy I don't even know. Kiss your kids goodnight, and tell them you love them. We're all they've got.
Jesus effing Christ. I have a newborn boy and reading this both enraged me and broke my heart. I wish I could give this kid a hug and a loving home. How is he doing now? Is his abuser in prison? I'm not calling that woman the M word, she doesn't effing deserve it.
Yeah, it really is overwhelming. I have new little ones and the world never looked so terrifying before. The thing is, I'm not even afraid of bills, job loss, whatever. I'm scared of people. I'm scared of who wants to use them or who might hurt them, who might lead them astray. Sometimes the lessons set in too late. Personally, I find comfort in the statistics and the fact that I'm always watching for my kids.
In Latin America, look for maids who have been with a family since they were children. In my country they are called criadas. This is form of servitude that closely resembles slavery and begins with a child, usually female, of a poor rural family being brought to live with a moderately wealthy urban family. The promise of a better future than what the parents could provide. These kids don't attend school and perform house chores all day and are paid in food and living quarters and sometimes the promise of money that the bosses are holding for them. They grow up this way, so when they are adults they are afraid to leave. They don't know any other way of life. The bosses don't often acknowledge anything wrong and they claim that the criada is grateful for having been given a better life. I sadly have to admit that this happened in my extended family. They were bosses to a criada who would be 75 years old today. Only after all my aunts died and my cousins inherited the criada, they acknowledged the wrongdoing and arrogance for her to have a pension and a house and never have to work again and be treated a respected member of the family. But it was too late. She only lived as a retired person for 5 years before dying. She never learned to read, she never had children or a husband or any type or significant other.
In Texas, something similar happened to my great-grandmother when she was around 10. This can happen anywhere, and children are particularly vulnerable. Her father traded her for some farm animals in the 1910s. So she went to live with this middle-aged married couple. She was supposed to be their servant in exchange for food and board. She had her first child fathered by the husband when she was 11. It didn't survive. The second one did. After my grandma told me about all this and more, I suddenly understood my great-grandmother better, her personality and her actions. And I had always wondered why she wasn't much older than her oldest children. And then I knew why. If I remember correctly, she died in the late 90s, early 2000s. She was a complicated woman. Edit. I'm not sure if this will make anyone feel any better, but stick with me. From what I understand, she ended up getting married to a man when she was around 18 or 20 or so to escape that situation. He was also very old and abusive. She went through a series of super old and abusive men. And I'm not pointing fingers, and neither is my grandma, but they all died from stuff like heart attacks early on. Maybe because they were old. It's a bit of a weird coincidence. Keep in mind, my great-grandmother was hard-working, but she was never allowed to go to school or do anything to invest in her own future. She was stuck in below minimum wage jobs with a whole lot of kids to feed and clothe. I can't say her life was ever easy or fair. She was a hard woman and hard to like. And I personally always thought that she seemed unhappy. I don't blame her on that score. But we loved her. She lived to be in her 90s in an assisted living facility, and at the very least, she had children and grandchildren who loved her.
That is so F-ed. And yet, not even very uncommon. Treating human beings like commodities, robots, or livestock only has consequences for the victims. The scum who are actually doing the bad thing just get away with it. And have gotten away with it for thousands of years.
This just makes me want to cry and punch something at the same time.
That doesn't just happen in Latin or South America. There was an article not long ago from a man in Seattle. His family had immigrated from the Philippines when he was a child. They brought their live-in maid with them. He didn't realize until he became a doctor or professor, don't remember which, that she was essentially his family's slave.
This story? It stuck with me ever since I read it. The author's parents were so casual about their evil.
Heartbreaking. Spent the last 15 minutes reading that story, so sad to see her not being able to stop being a slave even after she was told she doesn't have to keep working and could relax.
I haven't read this again since it was first published, but it's been on the back of my mind. Thanks for the link.
I'm rereading it now too. So incredibly sad and well written.
Thanks for linking this. I think it's something everyone should read, but if you're feeling a bit down, maybe wait until you're feeling stronger, because this is one of the saddest things I've ever read. Rip Lola.
That was a tear-jerker. I love how the kids gave her the respect she deserved, but it's still awful to think about how completely rotten the parents were to Lola.
That's the one.
What a woman. I sobbed a lot reading that and thinking of my grandma because she looked like her. Not in the same way, but my grandma had a tough life too. One of the saddest things I've read. Rip Lola heart.
God, that might be the saddest but most beautiful poo I've ever read.
Are you referring to this article?
Holy poo, that was a devastating but fascinating read. Thank you for sharing it. Rip Lola.
I believe the author died not long after writing it, too.
Correct, he was a professor at University of Oregon at the time. My sister was in one of his courses.
My mom was looking for a part-time live-in housekeeper when I was in kinda. US, a friend from church said that she knew a relative who could help. My mom was expecting to meet a grown woman who would help raise me and take care of the house while my mom was at work, someone who would be employed for a fair wage. It turns out this person was actually a 16-year-old girl. Obviously my mom jumped at the opportunity to hire her, and we took her in. Enrolled in school, made sure she got by well in her classes, and she helped my mom with the house and with me part-time. Being paid a full-time wage. We made it very clear that if she did not want to work, she would still be supplied with a place to live, food to eat, and a school to go to. She actually sent the majority of her wages back home to her family in a ranch in Mexico. She then graduated, later got married, and now has 2 beautiful girls. Smiley face. My mom told me when I was grown that she was daunted by the responsibility of essentially adopting a teenager, but did it because my mom was afraid of what might happen to her or what family she might end up with if my mom did not take her in.
Your mom sounds like an amazing woman.
Full-on hero.
This is such a beautiful break from all the bleak replies to this post. Instead of being turned into a glorified slave, she basically got a second family. Smiley face.
U80DKA is right. Tell your mum everyone on Reddit says she's a badass. I hope it makes her smile.
Your mom is a badass. We need more people like her.
Your mom sounds like an absolutely amazing woman, truly. But did she ask any questions of this friend from church? Like, hooking people up with kids to be slaves is as evil as owning slaves, people.
My mum didn't ask at the start because she legit thought it was just, oh, I know someone whose niece needs housekeeping work and might want to do live-in. Once she met the girl and the girl's aunt, my mum totally asked a million questions because she explained the situation to me as detailed as you can to a kindergartner before we took her in.
We had a case like that hit the news the other day. The girl was a slave for 40 years, and when she was in her 20s she was forcefully married with someone in the family so they could keep receiving his military pension after his death. Fortunately, she was rescued and managed to keep receiving the money, cause she was legally married with the guy. https://internacional/2021-01-14/madalena-escrava-desde-dash-oito-ano-seculo-triple11.html.
Wow, that is very sad. Thank you for sharing about this. Labor trafficking is just as big of an issue as sex trafficking.
Is your post intended to be about sex-related human trafficking? If so, then sorry for the out-of-topic comment.
No worries, this is perfectly on topic. It's good for everyone to be aware of all forms of trafficking, not just sex trafficking.
Labor trafficking is more prevalent than sex trafficking and just as devastating. But labor trafficking gets little attention as it's more adults impacted than kids. Both deserve justice and attention.
I think sex trafficking was probably the original intent, but most of us have never even thought about this type of human trafficking. So this is informative as hell.
Most of us have never even thought about this type of human trafficking, which is probably why it's the most common form of human trafficking. There are more slaves today than ever. Estimates for 2018 put the number of slaves worldwide at approximately 40 million individuals. About 25 million of those are in forced labor.
Labor trafficking is the majority of it. Sex trafficking just gets more of an advocating, I think. In Bangladesh we have a similar thing called Tanya, as in her name is usually Tanya. The wealthier family adopts her from a poorer family, but she doesn't get to play, nor go to school like the family's children. She does chores. She gets fed and clothed, but the money goes to her parents. It's a vicious cycle in Bangladeshi society because Tanyas get abused and berated. With the lack of education, they tend to make bad decisions when they hit puberty. Sometimes they run away around the ages of 15 to 18 with the first boy nearby that shows them attention. These relationships don't end up well because she's to being sold or end up being abused by the boy, man. Some Tanyas even go as far as turning to black magic and cursing the families when they grow up. Black magic because these wealthy families pride in themselves being Muslim, and then the stereotype just continues in society that orphaned girls are inherently bad, and that's why they do stuff like turning to black magic. My grandmother here in the US once joked about getting a Tanya when she moved into a big house. It really disgusted me, so that's one way to feel suspicious. Adoption by a family in which their home country's culture looks down on orphans. Because usually it means you're getting a Cinderella situation.
Ugh, that's so horrible. I knew selling poor kids into indentured servitude used to be normal many generations ago in my mother's home country in Eastern Europe, but to see that it is still common in many parts of the world today is really effed up. Also, as someone named Tanya, thanks for the heads up where not to visit lol.
I sadly have to admit that this happened in my extended family. A variation of this happened to my grandmother. We're Hispanic. She was the darkest of the three girls, so my great-grandmother pulled her out of school to help keep the home for the wider siblings who would, ostensibly, go on to have more success. As it happens, it's true. The others did find success, but we don't know much about them. But their tracks for careers are much different than this side of the family. There is a happy ending though. My grandmother didn't learn how to read, but she sure knew how to keep numbers. She went on to keep, and fully run, a successful farm. My grandmother was well off after running the farm and ensured that my mother was able to get a great education and save our immediate family's branch from falling into the trappings that her older siblings would not avoid. Part of it makes me angry, but my grandmother got her bag and nobody took her for a fool after her childhood. She really came into her own. It makes me sad to think that this is largely still a thing.
Here in Spain we get a lot of women from Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. Some pay for their trip to Europe this way. Some are blackmailed and some are lured offers of jobs like cleaning, or low-level administrative jobs, secretaries, paper pushing, and end up in a roadside brothel. If you're a young woman in a poor area of Eastern Europe and you get an offer for an easy job in Germany, France, Spain or the Netherlands, be very suspicious.
I was working in China teaching English. One of my fellow teachers was blonde and good-looking. One day she told me excitedly she had an offer to marry a Russian man. He was going to pay her $30,000 to marry him. All she had to do was travel to Russia to meet him. We were in Kikihe, about 2,000 km from Russia. I managed to talk her out of it. I think I may have saved her life.
It was definitely a trap. You saved her.
That terrifies me that she was going to go through with it. There must be many that actually do fall for it.
I couldn't believe it myself. She was a fellow teacher. I think she was about 28. Surely that would have been old enough to have some common sense.
Exactly. In the East, there have been public service adverts, billboards, posters, TV, etc. about this for at least 25 years. I'd say most people know, but the problem is sometimes people get so desperate, might have kids to feed, etc. They trick themselves into ignoring the warning signs. Well, this German nightclub job seems legit, or convince themselves it won't happen to them. I'd add, if you do go, just never give anyone your passport. If they need a photocopy, you can make it yourself. Also, men are not immune. Men are more often trafficked for labor, like construction work, but it's still very bad.
Men can also be trafficked for fishing. A big issue with Southeast Asian men literally not being allowed to leave fishing boats for years. All we can do as consumers is be choosy about where our seafood comes from, and make sure it's fair trade, humane, and sustainable. It's more expensive, but seafood is just a special treat instead of an everyday food.
Yup, look at Qatar labor trafficking for their World Cup.
Yeesh. That's really sad. Good advice. Hopefully it helps someone out there.
Stuff like this is so common in my country, Kenya, that we have signs around warning people from taking jobs in some countries, primarily Arab countries, where this is most prevalent. Plus, in a lot of Arab countries, the police will not help an escaped trafficking victim if they're black and will usually send them back to their captors. Happened to my aunt. It's so messed up how widely accepted this is there.
Highly religious and sexist countries are especially bad about blaming victims for being trafficked rather than blaming traffickers.
Stuff like this targets the most desperate of people who have nothing else going for them. Even the prospect of it being a real job, however slim, they'll take it just because they know it's their one shot.
Yeah, the desperation is so sad.
My wife used to teach piano in an affluent suburb, and one of her students had an elderly nana who was openly treated like dirt by everyone in the house. She began to suspect this was a case of trafficking, slavery, but shortly after she took a moment to talk to the old lady about her situation, the family got rid of the old lady and subsequently fired my wife from teaching their kid. Edit, answering questions. This was in Monmouth County, New Jersey around the year 2000. I believe the family was from India. The child said Nana was not her grandmother.
The family got rid of the old lady. Did they just throw her into the wood chipper or what?
There was a story like this in the Atlantic a few years ago.
Yikes. That's really horrible. It's good to be aware that both poor and rich people can be exploiters.
I actually have a story for this. I am by no means someone who exposes sex trafficking for a living, just someone who had an experience. I lived in a very sketch apartment complex in Phoenix. My wife and I generally keep to ourselves, so we didn't really have a problem. We at first noticed that there were constant visitors to our immediate neighbors. Their front door faced our front door. We figured maybe they were selling WD or some poo like that. Do you? We don't give a flying F as long as you don't bring trouble to us. Then we noticed it was only men who would show up every 15 to 20 minutes, stay for 15 to 45 minutes and leave. At this point we're thinking whatever, if a chick wants to use sex work, we can't give a poo. Then we noticed the pimp and the other girls in this apartment. They looked young, never left the apartment unless escorted, and would only stick around for a couple of months before a new girl was brought in. When I say young, I mean they looked maybe 18. We only started realizing during quarantine and were home all day. The men would constantly knock on our door throughout the day and night, which is what caught our attention. Anyways, we called Phoenix PD. They knocked on the door and said they couldn't do anything without us providing photographic evidence. So we sat on our patio one day and discreetly starting taking photos of all the men coming in. Call the cops again and provide evidence. They knock on the door again, a customer walks out and hauls ass. The girls all haul ass. The pimp comes by after and bangs on our door. We stayed at my dad's house for 2 weeks while a sex crimes investigator surveyed the apartment. The pimp helped them move out and the investigator was able to find their new spot. We moved the F out very shortly after because we were afraid of some sort of revenge. This is long, but pay attention to the people surrounding where you live. No need to be a nosy person, but when we actually started paying attention, we saw what was going on more clearly. We were concerned because none of these girls spoke any English, weren't allowed out of the complex without an escort, and seemed to be replaced constantly.
You are awesome and thank you for going the extra mile. I hope they were able to help those girls out.
Our country, Philippines, is unfortunately the global hotspot of child cybersex trafficking in the world. Unlike what's usually portrayed in movies, these children are not kidnapped by syndicates then sold to pedophiles. Sadly, most of the sexual abuses happen at home. Parents or guardians are the ones exploiting them to get money. I am not directly involved in the actual rescue or fight, but I do work with non-profit organizations that provide shelter and therapy for rescued victims. I've met and talked to some of these children. Many of them didn't even realize that they are being abused, especially those who were not RPDIRL. They were groomed to think that just getting nude in front of the camera or touching themselves for pedophiles is not bad. I think one important thing is that kids should know when they are being abused. It should be taught in schools. It can save lives.
I'm in the US. I'm friends with a woman that, when she was a child, her mother would charge men to come and RP her. They were always introduced to her as Uncle So-and-so. Her mother was heavily into DG and used the money to continue the habit. She's doing okay. Her mother is still in prison and there's no contact obviously. She finally ran away and got in touch with authorities when she was 16. My friend has horrible panic attacks just around men in general, and especially when the word uncle is used. She's nearly 40 and single by choice, and is very reserved and introverted. On anti-anxiety and anti-depression meds and sees 2 therapists regularly. She's so creative and imaginative, it just breaks my heart that she is hurt even to this day by what was done to her.
How does anyone ever recover from that?
Unfortunately, the answer a lot of the time is they don't.
This is the RL answer, unfortunately. Speaking as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, many, if not most times you don't recover, hell you don't even survive, hence the quotation marks. The suicide rate is high, so is the depression rate. I call it existing, not surviving. You take it day by day, sometimes minute by minute, and hope the next depression hole you fall into you can find something good enough in your life to pull you out of it.
Gosh, I've never heard anyone explain it any better than this. Being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse myself, I relate a lot to what you said. Therapists will tell you you're not victim, you're a survivor, but if I'm a survivor, why don't I feel that victory at the end? Sometimes I feel like I have small victories in the day, but there's still this big vacant hole in me that I don't think I could ever fill, and I consider myself a very positive person. I work hard every day to be my best and be happy. I don't want my kids to know the deep sadness I hold within.
You don't. At least not completely. Some people may be able to live a seemingly normal life and others may even be able to use their trauma to benefit others, but when we lay our heads down at night, it's with us. It always will be.
Jesus, this is heartbreaking.
So a guy who was a convicted child sex offender did an AMA on Reddit once. And I actually went and saw his profile and his posts, and man, I was kinda shocked and just how much child sex abuse happened within his family. Apparently his uncle had sexually abused him as a kid. I'm not fully sure, but I do think his uncle sexually abused his sister as well as a kid. And his sister has also apparently sexually abused him as a kid. And when he became an adult, he sexually abused his niece, sister's daughter. And I think he got caught and jailed and stuff, but he says he's now in a good position with his parents and sister. But man, what a vicious cycle and environment that he was in. Update: sorry guys, I couldn't find the original AMA. I tried googling for that specific and also the "Am I the Asshole" post as well, but I could not find it. To be honest, I kind of felt on edge googling it due to those words I had to use to Google. I did include Reddit in all my searches, but still felt weird. If I stumble up on it later, I'll post it on here.
Most child abuse happens at home, and that's true for sexual abuse. I once worked with a client who was the product of 2 generations of incest. His abusive grandfather had RPD his developmentally disabled sister, she had given birth, then he had sexually abused that child, who had a child who was my client. My client was sexually abused by the grandfather, and this whole cycle was only stopped when he was caught perpetrating on other kids. Social services was just so limited in what they could do to help in this situation. Kids who perp on other kids aren't easily placed. He kept getting put back in that home because we're obsessed with family unification. It was just a nightmare.
This is really horrible, but sadly, there are a lot of cases similar to this. Pensive face.
This concerns me because there was a study on the front page a few days ago about how children are being exposed to pornography younger now than ever before. The previous generation's first exposure to P was unwanted, by surprise, and they began using it around age 13 to 15, whereas today children as young as 5 know what it is, and it horrifies me. I've been shouted down for comparing this to abuse, but kids under 10 shouldn't know what this poo is. They shouldn't be aware of it. Kids who understand what it is begin to pursue it and begin to act it out upon their friends, siblings, because they're little goddamn kids, and that's what kids do. The pee industry is F-ed, but that poo is for adults who can control themselves. I worry a lot about what the kids exposed to pee this young wind up turning into, though I feel we already know.
I can confirm that this is exactly what happened to me. Brother started showing me our dad's not at all hidden VHS tapes when I was 4 to 6 years old. He was 9 to 11, and then he decided to recreate it. I don't blame my brother, I blame our parents. Just another symptom of the wild child abuse, and more importantly child neglect in my family. It only happened a handful of times, but it affected me deeply.
Jesus, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Yup. There's a reason pedophiles use pornography exposure to groom kids. Kids' brains are plastic as hell, and they just assume that what they see and they're taught is normal and right. My daughter is in grade 4 and they're already getting heavy internet safety education at school, comprising how to interact or not with other people online, how to safely search, etc. It's very important.
My stepkid's school gave them unrestricted laptops for distance ed, and now we're in hell.
Our Chromebook has their school Google accounts that are so locked down their parents can't even email them a photo of their completed schoolwork. That was a pitter. Try getting a good shot of a worksheet held up in front of a webcam. Our 6-year-old son has figured out how to say, search for pictures of Pokemon and cats, to his mom's phone, so we're going to have to address that. But he's so reactive that if we just try and talk to him about internet safety, he'll do exactly the opposite as soon as we look away.
Use your router to restrict websites, or better yet, use it to only whitelist sites you want them to be able to go to. You can add more whitelist sites as needed for research. I'm sure there's an already curated whitelist somewhere out there to get you started.
So I agree with the no pee under a certain age, but I disagree with kids being completely unaware of sexual actions under 10. That is exactly why abusers get away with abusing kids. They don't know it's wrong. I don't think kids should be exposed to pee, but I do think kids should learn that people touching certain areas and such is not okay and should be reported to an adult. I think they should learn that as soon as they can comprehend that.
Yay, I was sexually abused at the age of 7 exactly because I didn't know what my abuser was requesting was wrong. I knew I didn't like it, but I was taught about personal agency, bad touch, and sex 2 years later. That was 2 years of my being unable to put words to something that was truly effing me up inside. In contrast, my daughter is 5. She knows what sex is in broad kid-friendly terms. She knows that no one is allowed to touch her without her permission, especially on her private parts. She knows the correct medical terms for her body parts. She knows that if her friends do not want hugs, then she needs to respect them and keep her distance. These things are not hard to teach children. You can tell them what sex is and tell them that they need to wait until they are grown to try it. You also can have more than just one the talk, because that conversation evolves over time with their increased understanding and introduction to societal influences.
The touching started when I was 9. No one ever told me that there were parts of me I could say, no, don't touch me there. I just assumed because it was a parent, it was okay. You are absolutely amazing for teaching your girl about body autonomy at such an age. I wish it was taught in schools, even if it's in broad terms.
Kids should be taught what inappropriate behavior is. Yes, that their privates are private. But also, if any adult tries to spend time alone with them, tries to give them presents, wants to befriend them, or asks them to keep a secret. Any excessive attention from an adult should be noticed by the parents, but the kids should learn the signs of wrong behavior so they can tell their parents.
Wow, that is so sad. I have donated to some good nonprofits in the Philippines, and I will definitely consider doing so again soon.
It's a really complicated thing because it involves families. I only understood it deeply when I worked with nonprofits. Many victims stay silent because they think they're helping their family. Also, it's not just about the victim herself. If the mother is the culprit and she is taken to jail, the victim will be brought to a rescue shelter, then her siblings will be either taken care of by other relatives or taken to different institutions. It's sad because you're solving a problem, but in the eyes of the family and sometimes, even the victim herself, you're the one destroying their family.
I'm confirming this from Central, Eastern Europe. My parents are upset that I'm breaking up a family over a small, sexual assault that happened when I was 12 by another family member, and I refuse to speak to said person. The sexual assault was him making me suck his DK multiple times. Luckily I'm far away from my family now, but he got away with the abuse, as I have no proof. Edit. Thank you all for your kind words. I have an amazing so life is great now. Hopefully we'll be able to move in together this year, and start our little family. Smiley face. Somebody has posted here, estranged adult child subreddit is amazing, especially if you end up being estranged for any reason. Hope you all have a lovely day.
I'm sorry to hear that this has happened to you. Sadly, perpetrators are rarely caught and imprisoned. Sad face.
This internet stranger is proud of you for doing the right thing and ending the cycle. You might find some solidarity at our estranged adult child.
Jesus Christ, I am sorry that your parents are acting like this.
Yeah, the entire infrastructure needs to be ready to support shattered families, and so few societal infrastructures, even in first world countries, are able to.
My brother-in-law is a lawyer in the US who does a lot of work involving child custody. It can take months or even years to legally determine who the children should live with when one or more of their caretakers is being brought to trial. They can experience so much instability. It's really detrimental to their social and educational upbringing, especially if they're really young, and, like you said, if they're old enough to be aware that something is going on, they may blame the people who are trying to help them more than the people who've thrown their lives into chaos.
I think one important thing is that kids should know when they are being abused. It should be taught in schools. It can save lives, I wholeheartedly agree. It wasn't until I signed up to be a camp counselor in my early teens that I became aware of what specifically child abuse was, and that I had experienced it. I think often kids may be told to report if an adult hurts them, but when the adult doing the abuse is in a position of trust, the child can be so manipulated into thinking that they're not being hurt, that what they're told to do is normal, and they don't need to talk about it.
Yay! A while ago I had downloaded a video chat app, one of the most popular ones on the App Store, and it mostly matched me with people in the Philippines. They looked old enough to definitely be over 18, but their profile names on the app were things like REALKIDS, LITTLESISTER, 19YR and AMP, LITTLESISTER. I was appalled that it was the first app that popped up in the Play Store.
How does a person police and investigate this kind of online content without suffering PTSD? Is there a system for keeping the investigators mentally and emotionally fit? I don't think I could take it for a single day. Edit. Really? Reporting this question as a sign of psychological distress.
I'm not in law enforcement or any adjacent field, but my understanding is that burnout is quite common, and that many departments place people on relatively short assignments, a year or two maybe, and make sure that counseling and other assistive services are available. I've heard of internet content moderators, particularly for large social media companies, developing PTSD from repeatedly seeing all the fed up sexual and violent things that people post online. It gets flagged for a very good reason, but the people that have to review what gets flagged really have to see a lot of humanity's worst.
Man, I have seen a docu on YouTube about this stuff and it made me feel so sick. There was a scene at the end where these children were screaming and punching gym mats that were placed on the walls as a form of therapy. Hearing them scream made me cry so much.
They were groomed to think that just getting nude in front of the camera or touching themselves for pedophiles is not bad. Oh my god. There is so much going on that I am so ignorant of.
Yeah, and the worst part is that their parents, relatives are doing this to them. There are more sickening details of this happening in the dark web that would shock you.
No doubt it would. I cannot wrap my head around it, especially family members doing stuff to their own kids.
Oddly enough, I was kinda groomed at 16 to masturbating on camera for some dude in the States. First time masturbating, first time for all that jazz. Never had that sex talk with my parents. Thought it was normal, which led me down an even weirder path. Till I found my husband, who told me that none of that poo was right. Edit. Been with husband 7 years now, he me get diagnosed with BPD, gad, doesn't pressure me for sex or anything. We have a beautiful toddler. Sure, we have struggles, but my husband is very supportive. So no matter your age, you can fall prey.
I totally agree. My baker used to live in the Philippines and would tell me stories about how the rich white European males would pretty much take these girls and boys and use them to become P-stars or whatever. Well, at least the girls would be the P-stars and the boys would be the boy toys for the male's wife or whatever. She once told me that she had a friend from there and told her that she needs to protect her daughter because they are using them for trafficking poo, but unfortunately the mother had already known what they are doing with the kids and told my baker to shush and said, I make good money from my kids. Pretty fed up poo.
No kidding. It took me approximately 20 years to realize I was abused in many ways as a child. Growing up, no one tells you what's normal or not, so you just assume what you're experiencing is normal. Even when repressed memories present as flashbacks, and you know what you're remembering isn't normal. But abuse usually comes with gaslighting, and you can't be sure if what you're remembering actually happened, so you hope that those memories aren't real. Man. And now my family wonders why I won't talk to them. Maybe it's because no one protected me when I was a vulnerable AF child? The civil rights of most minorities are fed, but especially kids. It should be criminal negligence that no teachers or other adults in my life ever said anything.
There's an app you can download called Traffic Cam. Anytime you stay at a hotel, upload photos of your room. Those photos are incorporated into an artificial intelligence algorithm that helps identify locations of trafficking victims via background details.
How does that work? Are they trying to match up pictures of victims to hotel rooms to figure out where they were?
Exactly.
https://play.google.com/store/apps/details?com.exchange-initiative.traffic-only 50K downloads on Android. We probably need more.
Very good to know.
One thing to note is sometimes it can happen in your own backyard. It can be the people you least expect. I remember as a kid, maybe age 10 or 11, I used to play at one of my neighbor's house, down the street. The girl who lived there was 2 years younger than me, so around 7 or 8, and I knew that her family was poorer than ours, cause the house was smaller and sorta in shambles and very dirty. I played there all the time, and she would always say things that were odd, or sexual, and it would always make me uncomfortable. My gut told me something was wrong. One day she casually dropped that her brother had molested her and that his friends paid to use her body as well. I remember not being able to really process the weight of what she told me, but I knew it was wrong, and I ended up telling my mum, and my mum called CPS on the family. Not sure what ended up happening to her because my family moved neighborhoods, but it still really creeps me out to this day, knowing I had sleepovers at her house when her brother and his friends were over and I could have just as easily been taken advantage of. This type of thing is not uncommon at all.
Wow, that's really awful. Even more awful how common it is.
Most of human trafficking is not the movie kind. It's more the kind where an ethnic restaurant brings over a cook from their home country and they have to work unreasonable hours to pay back for the trip. Or maybe it's a maid or a construction worker who works below minimum wage and can't have their passport back, so look for people who work long hours at sub-legal wages.
There's a great story I read in which the author tells the story of Lola, who he eventually came to realize was his family's indentured servant. When his mother was a child in the Philippines, her mother died and a distant cousin named Lola came to live with her and her father to care for her in exchange for room and board. Apparently, the deal was for life. Lola stayed with his mother through adulthood, after marriage, and then came to the United States with the family. Eventually, long staying past the legal lengths of her stay, she was kept hidden away, cooking, cleaning and caring for the kids, with no pay. She faced daily verbal abuse from his parents, and didn't gain any type of freedom until the mother died and Lola moved in with the author and his family. I think situations like that happen far more often than people realize.
Here's the link to the article.
I know that article. What's interesting is when the kids got older and found out the truth and then confronted their parents. Remember, the kids had grown up seeing Lola never given a day off, being mistreated by the mother, having to sleep on the floor, etc. Talk about a reason to hate your parents. Now, one problem was how to get Lola out. They did return her to the Philippines, but her family was all gone by then and she would have been homeless there, so they took her back to the US. They tried to help her find regular employment and be by herself, but that didn't work out either, so when the parents died she ended up just living with the kids.
I believe after his mother died and he took her in, he got her naturalized legally and got her social security benefits. He then brought her back to the Philippines to visit and came back a month later, and she decided to come home with him as everyone she knew there was gone.
I think I remember it too. Was it the one where he paid for dental work she never had?
Yes, that was part of it. He got her a set of dentures as her teeth had all rotted and fallen out, as she had never seen a dentist in her life.
To add to this, the same applies for human trafficking for sexual purposes. The person being trafficked is rarely some innocent kidnapping victim, and more so someone in desperate situation who entered sex work as a last resort. Their trafficker is usually their pimp. If you want a really good breakdown of what human trafficking actually looks like, I suggest looking into the podcast You're Wrong About. They have a really good episode on the topic.
Here's the link to the episode. Edit. Also, you should listen to this episode, which contains more context for the issue. Thanks, you, Erotic Food Fiction, for pointing this out.
Thanks for the link.
I think it would help to know that a normal sex worker or immigrant worker situation looks like, so we can better identify the red flags versus someone just doing the best they can.
A friend of mine works to help victims of human sex trafficking in Central Europe. Two big first red flags she has talked about are the workers mostly local or foreign? There's generally a higher risk of foreigners being trafficked, since they are less able to escape due to being in a foreign country, foreign language, etc. Are the women, men in the brothels generally there long-term, or are they switched out frequently? Both of these are still just flags, and there are certainly exceptions. But brothels filled with a constantly changing staff of foreign prostitutes is much more likely to be trafficking. Here in Central Europe, it's a big hub of transporting victims from the east to the west.
There is no normal because it varies. I've done sex work in the past, was thankfully never trafficked, but knew people who were. Things to look out for is just a regular person, not a medical professional or law enforcement. Does the person work there every day, or do they have days off? Does the person seem overly fearful of their boss? If you know them personally, do they mention things like not getting paid, being in debt to their employer, or being afraid of things like wage theft? Does someone else hold their money for them? Are they often injured at work and or not provided adequate protection for the work they're doing? Trafficking and other crimes overlap, and trafficking isn't as clear-cut as many people want you to think.
I used to work for a non-profit, and we had a 2-day seminar one time, and one of the speakers was a former victim of sex trafficking. She was one of the few former sex traffickers I have ever seen take questions from the audience, and someone asked her why they didn't just go to the police. I will never forget her response. It was so sad. She said that the police were the worst one to tell because when they found out they would never help and they would make you give them services for free.
Why didn't you go to the police? Another reason is that the police may arrest you for sex work. My senior seminar was on sex trafficking. We worked with a non-profit, and we learned that victims very frequently get arrested instead of helped. It's super effed up.
That makes me so angry. I am very glad she managed to get out of that.
Indentured servitude, that's what it was called back in the day. In the early years of the colonization of the Americas, and continuing until the early to mid-1800s, unsure of date, of the newly formed United States, individuals who could not afford to travel from Europe would have the costs covered by people already established in the New World in exchange for work. It is illegal, and it's awful that it still happens.
Indentured servitude, that's what it was called back in the day. In the early years of the colonization of the Americas, and continuing until the early to mid-1800s, unsure of date, of the newly formed United States, individuals who could not afford to travel from Europe would have the costs covered by people already established in the New World in exchange for work. Those who follow Elon Musk in the news will note that this is his proposed structure for a Mars colony.
Reminds me of Orange is the New Black. One of the inmates was involved in human trafficking, and it was presented in a morally grey way. She was helping young girls escape poverty, gave them stable jobs, housing, and would protect the girls if clients were abusive. Edit. You all are getting the story twisted. She never prostituted any of the girls. She had them work as house cleaners. Nowhere does it ever imply or suggest that she or anyone in her organization asked the girls to prostitute.
One thing to know, no trafficked child looks the same. Here in the UK and across the world, children of all ages, genders and cultures are subjected to human trafficking and exploitation. Vulnerable children, like the ones on the streets, are targeted and moved both within countries and across borders. Those trafficked here into the UK are often taken from areas of poverty and made to go on dangerous journeys, traveling thousands of miles away from home, with many being abused and exploited on the way. On arrival at their destination, the children can be coerced into cannabis cultivation, benefit fraud and forced begging. Others are forced into sexual exploitation or domestic servitude. And the children do not realize that what's happening to them is wrong. I speak only for UK as I am a man from there. An increasingly high-profile form of child trafficking is county lines. This involves predominantly British children being groomed by their exploiters who then coerce them into buying and selling DG, often across the country. The exploiters purposefully prey on the most vulnerable children and teenagers, grooming them and gaining their trust over time, often by giving them expensive items such as designer clothes and mobile phones, before forcing them to deal DG to pay back the debt that they have incurred. They may be too fearful to speak out as they have become reliant on their traffickers to feed and clothe them. They may also have been subjected to physical, sexual and emotional abuse or do not know where to turn for help. Children who have been trafficked from outside of the UK often speak little or no English, making them even more isolated and dependent on those exploiting them. An almost perfect scheme. There ya go.
That is very interesting, and of course, extremely sad. What sort of measures are being taken in the UK to deal with this, so you know?
Unfortunately, there's no good way to track these children. They aren't registered anywhere. Our hospitals don't have central databases and there's no child identification system. Most of them just simply disappear.
Gosh, that's horrible. There seems to be no real solution except for an increasingly law-abiding, virtuous society, but that takes so much time and doesn't help the victims quickly.
To add to this, the police have gotten really good at recognizing county lines kids during lockdown, kids by themselves on trains, which has resulted in a lot of arrests of the people responsible. However, what's now happening is that older vulnerable people with cars are now being used instead to transport DG money. County lines is a serious issue that is so hard to tackle.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day. So be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.